The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword was the first Zelda game that I distinctly remember the hype cycle for, and I remember being really excited to play it. Though it's not one of my favorite Zelda games, I definitely think it's one of the better ones. A big contributor to that is the really interesting motion controls, which are often derided by others on the internet, but to me they've always worked perfectly. You really feel like you're swinging your sword around or controlling your beetle. It's such a bold and natural experiment for the Zelda series. This heightened emphasis on motion controls is a really big part of the game. Almost every puzzle involves it in some way, and most of your items incorporate them. Of course, the most notable usage of the motion controls is with the sword, and the swordplay in this game is more involved than any of previous Zelda games as a result of that. I mean, considering what previous Zelda games were doing, that's not saying much, but it's still true. Due to this, the game's plot focuses around the sword much more heavily as well. I mean, the sword has always been a big part of the plot of the Zelda games, ever since the third installment, A Link to the Past, but never before has it actually been characterized. A time-honored tradition of the franchise is to have a helper character, ever since Ocarina of Time introduced one in the form of Navi the Fairy. In this game, your helper is the spirit of the Goddess Sword, which will later be known by its better name, the Master Sword, Fi. Fi is a character that many people really dislike. She's easily the most frequently obtrusive of the partner characters in the main game, so these complaints make sense. Most of her dialogue I see little point in. I don't care about the temperatures of the volcano region. I know that it gets really hot there. However, there is one set of dialogue that makes an awful lot of sense to me, at least from a ludo-narrative perspective. It converges three things together: the Wiimote that represents your sword itself, and Fi. In fact, I think it's kind of genius. When the Wii Remote is low on batteries, Fi will tell you. Most people use this as the epitome of Fi being annoying. While it's certainly annoying that it happens so frequently due to the generally low battery life of Wii Remotes, I think that the actual occurrence works really well for the Ludo narrative. It further connects the motion controls to the world of the game. Of course Fi would know when you're low on battery. She's the spirit of the sword that the Wii Remote represents. I still think the line breaks the fourth wall too much, and it would be better if it was subtler, but I also don't know if most people would know to charge their Wii Remotes if the line were subtler. As it stands though, I don't think this is a bad line at all conceptually. Fi is the sword, and the sword is your Wii Remote. These three entities are inextricably tied, so when one starts to fade, the others will notice. Though most of Fi's dialogue is completely useless and frankly annoying, I think her commenting on the state of the Wii Remote is a great way of subconsciously connecting the player to the game and selling them that the object they're swinging around really is a sword. I just think the writing could use another draft. It's really clunky to have a character in-universe refer directly to your Wii Remote batteries, and it might be better to say something like, the magic in the sword is fading. Whatever the case, I still think that this often maligned line is actually incredibly underrated, and I think it's a shame that the HD re-release simply removed it instead of trying to improve upon it. This has been Arcade Everlasting, someone who thinks that Skyward Sword is one of the more underrated Zelda games in general, signing off. Thank you for watching.